Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and comrades against the binary. My name is Sorio99, and I'm doing this now. So, this past week, Nintendo of America put out a gameplay demo of Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Mr. Aonuma himself played through a little bit of it, showing off some of the new features. I recorded a raw reaction to that. I recorded myself, reacting to the video fresh and new. I think it was okay, but there were a few problems. Namely, because it was a reaction, I had my face cam on, and because of how I have my whole streaming setup laid out, my face cam was in the top left corner of the video, which just so happened to be the single most important section of the video. So this time, I'm just going to do an analysis of the video without face cam or anything like that, just reacting to the video raw. There were other issues, just audio quality, not happy with my light setup, but yeah. So, just gonna do a analysis of the video, and I know that's all the rage right now, but yeah. And let's begin.
Hello everyone, I'm Eiji Aonuma, producer of the Legend of Zelda series.
Just a short little intro here, and we learned something very interesting.
I have some news. Development on the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is now complete.
Okay, so first comment that I'm pausing to analyze. I've seen a lot of people questioning online, hey, why didn't they show off these gameplay features before? Why is this, the first time we're seeing, a lot of the main selling points for the game? And on one hand, we have seen a lot of this before, maybe not explicitly, but especially, we've seen a couple of the abilities and the result of the Ultra Hand in trailers before, just never in, explicit detail. But I think the answer to why we haven't seen more details about Fuse and Ultra Hand before this, I think this comment is probably the linchpin of that. I think when he says that development has been completed, I think he really does mean it has been completed very recently. And so, as a result, I'm thinking that, because the one thing everyone agrees is Fuse and Ultra Hand, even at their most simple, most even the simplest and most bare bones, bottom of the barrel implementation of the mechanics would be so much work to implement. It would take so much time and effort just to put them in and to test everything. And my thinking is, A, they've been working on it straight up until this month, and B, I think there was a decent chance that they were if we cannot make this work, we can't put it in the game. Because, of course, Aonuma later says, oh, if you think something might be possible, it probably is. I think that, if they couldn't make it work, they were going to be well, we can't put it in the game if it doesn't work. That's just my theory. Obviously, there are a ton of other reasons for it. Could be. But, yeah. That is what I'm thinking. Let's continue.
Thank you very much for waiting. Many of you are looking forward to this game, and we've released a few trailers so far.
Yep.
Although it'll just be a brief glimpse, I'm going to actually play the game for you all today and show you what it's like.
It's in a very scripted environment.
Okay? Let's begin.
And we begin. So, again, pausing right away because, oh my lord, is there just so much. Just already there is so much to dig into. So, first off, we have a couple of UI elements on screen. I've seen people questioning why we begin in, standard Hyrule, an area from Breath of the Wild. And I believe the two reasons for that are, one, to highlight the differences, and two, because that's just how you start something like this. You know, you start with the familiar, then build up to the new, right? So, right away, we can see a lot of UI elements are the same. The horse controls seem to be identical. We've got the temperature, clock, sound meter. We have the mini-map, too. The mini-map is interesting because it has coordinates at the bottom. I'm pretty sure those are just like dev tools, like this is a dev build of the game. So it has those coordinates because in standard gameplay, I think those wouldn't be as necessary. They might be useful, but not really as useful as they would be for developers. And in the top left corner here, we can see what looks to be a grayed out sword with like a shine at the top. The sword and shield icon for the HUD have been slightly tweaked, I believe. And of course, we have the apple on the top of the directional pad, which I was very confused about when I first saw. I was like, oh, is that like feeding the horse while you're moving? And no, we will see what that is shortly. So.
Here we are, in the land of Hyrule.
Yes.
Like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, there's a vast world to explore.
Yes.
Of course, it's not just the same world as is. It's changed in many ways.
So, right away, he says the world has changed in many ways. We can actually see some of that here. I love Breath of the Wild. I've played it in the past, like, few months, but I am not an expert at it. I have not memorized every single UI and map element of Breath of the Wild to the point where I could recognize it instantly. However, I do know it pretty well, and I can tell you where this is. I can tell you what location this is. This is near Dueling Peaks Stable. You can tell because stable, cliff faces with a river running through, and yeah, we will see things. And what I think is most interesting is right away in this first part of the trailer, you can detect changes. First off, we have one of these, which we will see a little bit better in a few seconds.
If we talk about all of the changes today, we'll run out of time, so we hope you'll see...
We see strange sort of constructs already on the ground here.
Out for yourself when
the
game launches.
So the enemies are on the ground.
In this game...
So, from here we can already see a couple things. This... Yeah, that's new. I believe that's one of the Sky Islands, just situated weirdly. This... I saw one of these in the most recent direct trailer for Breath of the Wild. And I'm still not sure what this is. It could be like this game's equivalent to shrines. Because the one in the previous trailer that I saw was basically where the shrine in Hateno Village is. Like, it is basically right there. This one isn't as perfectly lined up with a pre-existing shrine, but it would not surprise me if this is like where the shrines go in, or shrine equivalents, as we will see. But as of right now, it is still a mystery. As we continue on here, we see more things. Obviously, you know, that is questionable. And of course, we got the Sky Islands.
The sky.
Now,
you'll notice some land masses floating up there. We call them Sky Islands.
Yeah. So,
you're probably wondering something.
Here's the interesting thing. I mentioned that this intro section was mostly because, like, get a taste of the familiar before you move into the new. And that is, I believe, its main purpose. However, we can see new things. First off,
to the Sky Island.
Korok with a backpack. Korok with a big old backpack, moving along here. This is interesting. This could be one of two things, right? Because, in Breath of the Wild, there was only really one Korok that you found, like, as an NPC outside of the forest. You only really ever saw Hestu just sort of roaming around the world. You saw him in a few locations, one of them very close to where this is. And it is possible, I think, that this is basically our Hestu of the game. Like, I could very easily see, like, oh, a Korok with a big backpack. Oh, that's how you trade in Korok seeds for more inventory space, right? That is one possibility. The other possibility is that in the time between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, Koroks have become just more normal NPCs, and that there are just some who are out and about in the world. We will still have to see. Big question mark there. We're coming up on Dueling Peak Stables here, and there's something you might notice is missing here. There are a few new things, like construction projects all over the world, but there's something you might notice is missing if you've played Breath of the Wild recently.
When they're so high up.
Can you spot it yet? The shrine is missing. So the shrines are not in the game world. As far as I can tell, the shrines are gone. And obviously, you know, it's a sliding scale of whether or not this is actually a story thing, or if it's just like, well, we're not putting all of the shrines from the original back in, so we can just remove, like, that geometry from the world. I don't know. It's a question, but it is interesting to note that the shrines haven't just been, like, overtaken by, like, anything. The shrines are gone. We also see Beetle here, looking about the same as ever. A couple of stable employees, the little children. We also see construction project a little bit better here. There are construction projects in a few places that we've seen in Hyrule. The main question, I think, is who's making them? I'm imagining it's like the races are now expanding back into areas of Hyrule that were previously uninhabitable. The question, I guess, is mostly, like, how much have things changed between the end of Breath of the Wild and the start of Tears of the Kingdom? You know, how much time has passed? How much, like, work has been done, you know? Because we can see the construction project here. There also appears to be one over there.
Oh, something's falling from
and
the sky.
Here we go.
Do you see it?
Now we're getting to the
Let's head over to it.
But yeah, you can see more construction projects, including the original. This tower is in the Breath of the Wild map, but that isn't. This is not in Breath of the Wild. This sort of area isn't in the original Breath of the Wild map. So, I am curious, because this doesn't look like the same kind of construction as the others we see. So this might be an enemy construction, since we see that, like, the enemies have developed some kind of industry or something. They can mine
where the object fell.
So, we come up to our first new ability.
Okay, let's...
So, we actually switch the abilities with the L button, it seems. Or, we switch them in a separate menu and use L to activate them. It's not completely clear. I'd imagine it's L to activate because of Breath of the Wild, but I'd also imagine it's L to switch because it would make more sense to have switching the abilities be on one of the, like, quick menu things. but there isn't really any other button shown for that. It's a question mark for right now. We will see how the controls are in the actual game. Not the most important thing, but worth noting. So this is our first ability.
Link's new abilities. If you do this on the rock that just fell... Look, it started rising. This power is known as recall, which rewinds an object's movement.
So, recall. So, as anyone who's watched the full demo knows, there are 4 abilities that are shown off in this video. 2 of them, I think, are going to be, like, world-shattering, like, no matter how they're implemented. But 2 of them are interesting because depending on how they're implemented, depending on what their limitations are, they could either be very, very, like, situational, boring things, or they could be, like, absolutely game-breaking. And recall is one of those. Recall rewinds an object's movements. Now, what does that mean exactly? So, the rocks, we assume, are, like, very scripted things. They're not like, oh, they only, like... They're scripted in the sense that you can't... The rocks seem to be scripted in the sense that they fall in very predetermined ways. Like, it's a preset animation, rather than them being full physics objects like the logs or the boulders or stuff like that. So, rewinding those would be pretty simple. It's just playing the animation in reverse. The question is, does this affect physics objects, and can it affect living beings? My guess for that last one is, if it can affect living beings, that's probably like an upgrade, similar to how stasis worked in Breath of the Wild, because obviously recall is very reminiscent of stasis. It's, you know, messing with momentum and time and stuff like that. So, I would imagine if you can manipulate enemies, that's something you have to unlock. But, I could be wrong. As for physics objects, it's hard to say at the moment. It is entirely possible that recall's moment-to-moment utility is just like, oh, if you get stuck, you can rewind something and hopefully get unstuck. But we will see when it comes to the actual release. But it looks interesting, at the very least. And it is a very cool way of rising up, if nothing else.
Closer to the Sky Islands.
So,
let's use the paraglider to reach one of them.
We also see the paraglider here for the first time in the video. Not much to say. It looks different than the one from Breath of the Wild, but that's to be expected. I do know that some of the amiibo will have, like, paraglider skins or whatever, so I am curious if the paraglider is a lot more customizable in this game. It would make sense if it is, make sense if it isn't. We will see later on. But for now, just noting the paraglider.
There are a few others.
And I almost forgot. We still have the classic stamina wheel. Seems to drain about the same speed. We also see the dive button right here, which is very interesting. We will see the diving later on, but I think the diving is, yeah, it's okay. It's a very nice quality of life thing for a Sky Island based game. And so we see Link drop down here, and we see one of the dragons. I don't believe this is one of a dragon's I could be wrong. If it is Dinral and that's Death Mountain, that could be like a very standard like path for it, but it's hard to say at this distance. We also see some decoration here, including the dragon, which we see in the logo as well, but
so we hope you'll try a few different methods.
It's interesting given what we are later implied.
Now we're on a slightly bigger sky island.
So, here we see a bit more about the Sky Islands themselves. It was a big question of what exactly were the Sky Islands gonna be like, and I think this makes the most sense, is that they're not the shrines of the game. They're basically like mini like areas, smaller biomes almost. Not even smaller in some cases. Like, these islands look pretty big here. But, you know, more compact and less interconnected than the lower Hyrule. But we also see that it has different biomes. We have snow, in a more autumnal area here. So, it is interesting to see that. We also see this tower here. And a bunch of Sky Islands off, including the cube. I don't know what's up with the cube. There's something there. Probably.
Just like on the surface, there are several man-made structures.
Yeah, lots of man-made structures. Almost like they were created by someone. Yeah, the yellow trees. Interesting. So the biomes aren't like straight from the surface world. They are different.
There's a branch on the ground. When you
We
find
see
something like this,
tree
you
branch.
should pick it up. It might come in handy later.
So this is a very minor thing. This probably isn't actually like worth spending too much time on, but this tree branch is very different from the tree branches in Breath of the Wild. Because in Breath of the Wild, you know, obviously all the tree branches were brown. Because most of the trees were brown. I am very curious if those original tree branches are still in the game, or if this is just like the new texture for the tree branch. I could see it going either way. I could see these branches being just like a very Sky Island exclusive thing, and then the default branches from Breath of the Wild are more on the surface. But I could also see it being like, oh, well, these are the branches now. Because, you know, it didn't always make sense for the brown branches in Breath of the Wild. It wouldn't always make sense for the white branches in Tears of the Kingdom. It's not the end of the world if some things don't perfectly line up like that. But, yeah. And so, as we go on, we find
Something's there.
a construct. And this is the first highlighted construct that we see. We did see glimpses of them earlier, as I mentioned, and of course we've seen some construct-like beings in previous trailers, but this is our first, real look at them. And obviously there's a lot to say about their design and stuff. I think one of the things that has been pointed out a lot online is how similar they are to Skyward Sword robots, but yeah. They seem to be pretty standard enemies. I'm assuming if they're not the Bokoblins of the game, they are one of the Bokoblins. Like, some areas will have Bokoblins, some areas will have these constructs. Yeah.
A new enemy called a construct. We'll fight it
So,
using the branch we just picked up.
We also see the return of the weapon degradation system from Breath of the Wild, which I personally will always defend as a good choice and a logical implementation for a game like this, but I know a lot of people online are very like, oh, the weapons break all the time, it's so fucking stupid, and it's like, grow up. But, yeah. So, weapons still break, but obviously we will see things that, yeah, sort of, we will see things pretty soon that sort of temper that trait.
The branch broke.
We also see the constructs seem to have a standard amount of health for starting enemies.
Get another branch and we defeated it.
So we see it drops the materials, Soldier Construct Horn, fair enough, and the Zonai charge. I have seen people questioning, like, hey, Nintendo, why didn't you, like, actually address this in the video? And it's like, it's a gameplay video. It's based around the gameplay, not the story. Like, do you really want story spoilers while you're already getting spoiled on the gameplay? Like, really? Yeah, this will be very interesting. For people who don't understand what the Zonai are, they're basically a civilization that's implied to exist in Breath of the Wild that I don't think are ever actually named in Breath of the Wild. They're like their existence is exclusively confirmed in like the book based on Breath of the Wild, creating a champion that has like a ton of like, yeah, it is weird, and I'm sure they will play, if not a major role in the story, certainly a role, because they seem to have constructed the robots, and I think it's very likely that they constructed most of the Sky Island's infrastructure and architecture and stuff like that. But moving on.
We've now explored more of this Sky Island.
So we see mushrooms here. This is a very minor thing, but we see very different mushrooms here that we don't really see in Breath of the Wild. Presumably these are just like a Sky Island variant or like yellow biome variant of the mushrooms.
More of this Sky Island.
They might have different properties, but yeah.
Fighting with just a branch won't get us very far.
And here we come to the first major innovation.
So here's another one of Link's new abilities. If we use this branch and the rock over here, and do this...
So Fuse is probably going to be insane. Fuse is wild. Fuse is fusing weapons to objects. It is fusing shields to objects. It's fusing arrows to objects. This is maybe one of the most wild things they could have added. So, we see a very simple example here. We see a boulder fused onto a stick. The boulder kind of shrinks a little bit in the inventory, which makes sense, you know. Can't hold like a full boulder on your body. Even if you can hold pretty wild things on your body, it would... clipping issues, you know. But, yeah, it adds a lot more power and strength to the stick, and it's very durable. We also see a long stick here, which is interesting because long sticks were not a thing in Breath of the Wild. We had spears. We had Boko spears, which this kind of looks similar to, but we didn't have things called long sticks. So, ultimately, I imagine it will be very similar, if not identical to Boko spears, but it is worth noting that there is new there. So,
sorts of things by experimenting with the fuse ability. You can fuse two weapons, for example.
We can also fuse weapons together, like that long stick and a standard pitchfork, which fuse together to make an absurdly long pitchfork. This is absurd. This is absolutely absurd. So, here's a question about fusion that isn't answered in the video that I want to talk about for just a little bit. The question of how much can you fuse things together? Because I think the most likely answer is you can fuse one weapon to one other thing. So, like, you can have a weapon and a physics object or material, or you can have a weapon and another weapon, but you can't have, like, 2 weapons and a physics object, or like 3 weapons altogether. So, my main evidence for that right now is, one, they only really show off, like, pair things, if you know what I mean. But the other thing is, when we come to the arrows, those seem to pretty clearly only have one thing fused at a time. I could be wrong. Maybe the weapons can be fused to more things. If so, then this mechanic is gonna get absurd. But, you know, at the moment, I'm assuming, you know, very standard. They're, like, fuse something onto a weapon, and then that's your weapon.
With this, we don't have to get...
We also don't see in this video if we can unfuse things, which would be very interesting to find out.
enemies, and we can safely attack from a distance.
But yeah, so we also don't see if there's like any weird fusion things. So the main thing with fusion, the main question is, how advanced is it? Because obviously the most advanced option, the most out there option would be every combination of 2 things has like something special for it. Like if you fuse a stick and a rock, you get like a hammer mallet, or if you get like a sword and a rock, it like does something special there. The more realistic option is that basically any object you add to a weapon has like a preset sort of function. Like the rock raises durability and raises attack, and like the pitchfork raises range and raises attack. Even then, that's still like so much work, so much like development time. Like it is still incredibly absurd, and it will be so fun to experiment with, but you know, not the most wild thing in the world. We will have to see, but here we see it's not just weapons that can fuse. We can also fuse arrows with items. And so 2 interesting things here, to me. 2 interesting things. Well, 3 counting this mushroom, but that's not really that interesting. 2 interesting things. 1, the amber has been completely changed. This is not what the amber looked like in Breath of the Wild. The amber looked completely different. This is much pointier, much more clearly like a, well, stabby thing, honestly. The other interesting thing is this leaf, this Korok frond. Now, this looks very similar to the Korok leaf weapon from Breath of the Wild. And I am very curious if the Korok leaf is still a weapon that you can find in Tears of the Kingdom, or if this frond is basically a replacement and like you can fuse it to like arrows and weapons in order to get the same effect as the old Korok leaf. Or if the Korok leaf is just gone and this serves a completely different purpose, because, you know, as we see later on, there are fans that don't involve leaves. So we will see when the game comes out or when we get more information. One other interesting thing is it has a heart here, which we see with these food items. This is clearly like a new food item, like a leek or a turnip or something. Possibly a fusion of both. But yeah, so healing items. Korok frond apparently is something that you can eat to restore a little bit of health. I am curious if, because we see him fuse the frond onto the arrow, but we don't actually see him shoot this. We see this like, oh, it shoots harder. Like, I believe that's like an attack up, but we don't actually see him fire it with the frond attached. I am curious if shooting something healing, what that does to an enemy. Because, like, the main question everyone is asking is, like, ooh, meat arrow, shoot a meat arrow. But, like, what would that do? I don't know. We will see later on. It will be fun to experiment with. The simplest option is it's just like, oh, it's a little bit more damage. Nothing crazy, but yeah. So we see him move over to the white choo-choo jelly. And again, attack up. This is interesting. God damn it, I keep doing that. God damn it. It's fuck. Hold on. Okay, fix that. So, something interesting to note is we don't have special arrows anymore. We have fusing, which gives the arrows the properties of those special arrows. So, for example, the ice arrow is now just white chili on an arrow. That is interesting. That is very interesting. And it's especially interesting because I don't know what that says about the bomb arrows. I don't know if bomb arrows are coming back. And it also says something about the ancient arrows, because what kind of fusion do you need to do to make those happen? They might just be completely gone, which I would understand. You know, the ancient arrows could be a little bit overpowered in Breath of the Wild, but it will be interesting to see. I think it is well within the realm of possibility that there are, like, special interactions to do things like the bomb arrows or the ancient arrows. Because, as we are about to see, there are special item arrow interactions. So,
apparently my eyes can't track fast-moving objects as of late, so my shots rarely land.
That is an incredibly sad joke. That is just, yeah.
So at times like these,
so
here's an eyeball you can get by
the Keese eyeballs, which, as we see, are the homing arrows. That is very new from Breath of the Wild. That was not in that game. So, obviously the two questions are, one, is it just Keese eyeballs or is it any eyeballs? Because, like, obviously there are Octorok eyeballs in Breath of the Wild. Are the Octoroks back? Probably. I don't remember if we've seen them before, but probably. Would the Octorok eyeballs do the same thing as the Keese eyeballs do? Or would they be different? Or what? The other question is this the only special, like, material like arrow interaction that isn't based on Breath of the Wild? If this is the only one, then it's still cool. But if it isn't, then they could get very wacky and weird with this. This could be very interesting.
I fused a mushroom to my shield.
I need to explain because in my original reaction, this broke me. Oh, this broke me so bad. This seems to indicate, like, I believe you can pick those mushrooms up. Could be wrong, but if you can, then you can fuse materials to, like, shields and swords. If you can't, then it's like, it's disappointing or whatever. I believe you probably can because here's the thing. I'm imagining the main limitation of the fuse mechanic is you can only really do it with, like, physics objects, you know? Like, you can fuse, like, logs and boulders and stuff like that, but you can't fuse, like, a cooking pot or, like, a still-standing tree to, like, your sword, you know? You can't have a fucking... You can't have a shield with a sign on it, you know? Like, it is just physics objects. But materials do also appear in the game as physics objects, so that would be interesting. Also, I imagine you can't fuse living beings to your items, even just like animals and not monsters. I could be wrong. It would be wild if you could do that. I know doing stuff with cuckoos would be that would be exploited to hell and back. But yeah, we will see later on. But for now...
Now, you're probably wondering if this has any use. Well, this mushroom is actually a puff shroom.
See, a puff shroom
Fight an enemy with this.
has an interesting use, which is...
I blocked with the shield.
Yeah.
Okay, there's smoke now. The enemies...
So, some fusions seem to be very temporary things, like that puff shroom, like, the first hit, it's like, oh, the shroom is gone, and now it's just a normal shield again. But it also has a very interesting use, because it does have the smoke screen, which makes me think there are going to be some very interesting properties at play here.
Lost sight of Link, so... attack. Even if you struggle with combat...
Here's another thing.
Down enemies using similar methods.
This is labeled a wooden stick. This is very different from Remember Our Place, 639. This is very different from the tree branch we saw earlier. So it makes me think that branches and sticks are very different classes of weapons. Because this one looks almost like a sword. So it makes me think like the sticks are like the clubs, if that makes any sense. I don't know. It's hard to say, but...
You usually get powerful weapons by defeating strong enemies. But in this game, fusing even the weakest weapon with something else could turn it into a useful weapon.
And here we see a rock going on a shield, which appears to raise its attack. I imagine that might be misreading that, might be a simple thing. Or it might be like you can parry or something. I don't know. We will see. He doesn't pick up the cricket there, so I hate him forever.
Some of the Sky Islands even have rivers.
So, here's the other thing where no matter how they implement this, this is going to be absurd. We saw a bit of this in the previous trailer. I think I would not be the only one who, when I saw the previous trailer, I was like, oh, there are certain objects that you can, like, move around and, like, glue together and, like, make vehicles. It's, like, very specific objects, like these mechanical pieces, you know, like the fans and the wheels and stuff like that. Turns out, nope, it is any physics object again. You can fuse logs together to make a makeshift raft.
It's a makeshift raft. This is another.
It's a makeshift raft. And the ability's name is Ultra Hand, which, let me tell you, that fucking broke me. That, oh my god. Oh my god. Okay. So the Ultra Hand is in Zelda, which is wild. Yeah. You can glue things together.
Even though the logs are currently attached.
One interesting thing I find about... God damn it. Okay. Nothing broke this time. One interesting thing about this is we see the controls for this. We see, you know, forward, back. We have rotate, which seems to be like a full 3D rotation. We also have unstick, which is wiggling the right stick. I don't know. I love that. It's just so silly. It's like, come off. And so he repositions the logs to make a starship, which everyone points out. But it's not just a starship, because it does actually have a practical use, which I don't think I've noticed people. This might actually be like to make like a cut through the water a little bit more, like, you know, like an actual boat. Or it could just be to make fusing these on easier. And here we see the battery for the first time, so it appears that objects on the same construct have like a battery that they draw from when they're powered on.
Try attaching it.
And if you hit any part of the construct, as we will see later, it will activate those parts. And as we see here, glues right onto the log in a very nice way. So it seems like they have put thought in like making everything attach in ways that are like useful and very like pleasing. So yeah, you're not going to spend hours just trying to get it on the exact right spot.
Pretty fast with the wind from the fans.
And yeah, cut through the water, cross the river pretty quickly. And here's something interesting that does not go noted. God damn it. Here's something very interesting that I want to point out.
All right.
So, see him get off the boat, get on the land, and Ranger construct, and we get a little talk option. Some of the constructs are not hostile. Some of the constructs are friendly. They are friendly NPCs. I find that very interesting. I would also note, this one doesn't appear to have the antenna that a lot of the enemies in this game do. We also see a stam bulb, which I'm guessing is like basically a flower that when cooked gives better stamina. Yeah. Or restores stamina or gives extra stamina. Who's to say? We will see. But, oh, I'm muted.
Large car and a flying machine.
Yeah.
Those
Something that doesn't go noted here. Some of these have steering abilities, which I am very interested in how that works. If there's like a specific steering thing, because like, yeah, you see, it seems to be about the same here and on this like thing here. I'm imagining it is like a very specific like steering, not wheel, but like grips from the looks of it, that you can find out in the world and attached to certain vehicles.
Instead, you'll be able to freely craft them on your own.
And here we have a flying raft. This is a very interesting bit because it shows off what might be one of the limitations that they used for this system. So we see it lift off, and we see it takes up a lot of energy to get it lifted into the air like this. I am wondering if there's a way to upgrade the batteries. Like maybe there's like an upgrade you can find for the Ultra Hand, or maybe there is like some element that you can add on to the constructs to like give it more battery life, basically. We will see when the game comes out. But for now, we move on to our fourth and final ability. And the second ability that, depending on how it's implemented, could be really boring or really game-breaking. We have Ascend. Ascend is interesting. It's a very simple ability on paper. If there's a ceiling, you can go through it.
There are some restrictions, but what's great about this ability?
He says there are some restrictions. Obviously, you know, if you could just go through anything that was above you, this would be absurdly broken, especially with a game with like Skylines. It's like, oh, you're like at the bottom of a canyon and there's an island above you. Whoop, suddenly you're millions of miles up in the sky, and this will be that would be a bit much.
You can use it anywhere. For example, this place has a cave with a hill right above it.
But it does still have a lot of practical use, because it doesn't appear to take up stamina, or at the very least not much.
Come on.
So, here we see it's like a very swimming animation. It might take up like a kind of stamina, but if it does, it's not shown here. So, there are two questions with this, right? The first question is, what is the limit on what you can move through? is there a max amount of material that you can pass through with Ascend? And judging by this, the answer might be no, because it looked very, thick. It looked like you had to move through a lot of space. I imagine there is some upper limit, but it's probably a very high upper limit, given the way that this is framed in the video. The other question is, what is the upper limit? Because it must exist. What is the upper limit on what counts as a ceiling? Like, how far away does the ceiling have to be to count as a ceiling? That will be very interesting to see, because obviously it's like, we see two very different examples here. The cave ceiling was a fair ways away, while the little shrine ceiling was much more simple, not something that would be impossible for you to climb up to. It will be very interesting to see what those limitations are. But for now, it just seems like a nice quality of life thing, you know? Yeah, you can rise up without having to worry about climbing, which will also make the whole rain thing a lot more bearable. But and here we see two very interesting things. So, first off, we see that the enemies can use fused weapons as well. They are not restricted to just sticks. That is very interesting. It implies to me that more than likely Link's abilities in this game are Zonai in origin, because seemingly the constructs are very Zonai, so probably story implications there. But from a gameplay perspective, it will make things a lot more dynamic. You know, not every enemy will have the same club, you know. The other thing we see is what this fusion does. It's a fan.
Looks like it's got some sort of fan.
This is a fan, which is very interesting, especially from the player's perspective of, making fans. But I could also see it being very annoying, because this is a game about Sky Islands. Some enemies have fans. This was inevitable. Okay. The falling, very, very Skyward Sword, got a dive mechanic, and of course you can pull out your glider and glide. I'm interested in how exactly it will work, if there are, how far you can just drift without gliding. We will see when the game actually releases, but for now the main interesting thing is the peek at Hyrule that we get. Like I said, I am not an expert in Hyrule. I cannot tell you literally everything that this shows off. I can see a few noteworthy things. For example, Death Mountain has those tendrils coming out of it. So that wasn't Death Mountain we saw before, I think. Unless he was doing something really funky. Yeah, we see a lot of Hyrule in this section. So, theorists wanting to figure out how exactly things have changed, you will love that.
You can speed things up, like this.
And we see another construction effort here near the very end of the video. And we see something that we saw in the previous trailer, but is still interesting. One of the flying enemies holding one of the bokoblins. So, that's basically it for the gameplay stuff.
I'm sure some of you watching me play were thinking, wait, if you could do that, then maybe you could do this too. In this game, you can do a lot of things just by thinking about what's even possible. There's still a lot of new gameplay, mysteries, and encounters we couldn't show today, but they're all jam-packed into this unfamiliar Hyrule, and we hope you'll use your imagination to explore it.
This is a lot. There is just so much, and I am so excited for the game.
Thank you for watching.
I was already excited. I was already of the opinion of, if this isn't in, like, my top 3 games of the year, this will be, like, a travesty. But this video just brings it up to 11. And of course, you know, because this is arguably one of the biggest games of the year, of course, we have a Nintendo Switch based on it. Yeah. So, that's about it. And oh my god, this is going to be absurd.